Daniel Mthimkhulu claimed degrees from Munich, WITS, and VUT. Lucky Montana called him a leading engineer. Prosecutors called him a fraud. The truth cost South Africa's rail system billions, and commuters paid the price. In April 2010, the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa desperately needed engineering expertise. Years of underinvestment had left the rail network crumbling, and PRASA's leadership wanted someone who could modernize their aging fleet. Daniel Mthimkhulu seemed perfect for the role. His CV listed impressive credentials: a national diploma and B.Tech from the Vaal University of Technology, a master's degree from the University of the Witwatersrand, and most impressively, a doctorate from Technische Universität München in Germany. PRASA appointed him as Executive Manager of Engineering Services with an initial salary of 1.6 million rand per year. Within months, Mthimkhulu approached management with urgent news. A German engineering firm had offered him 2.8 million rand annually to join them. PRASA couldn't afford to lose such talent. They immediately matched the offer, nearly doubling his salary to keep their star engineer. But there was a problem. Every single qualification on Mthimkhulu's CV was fabricated. He had never earned a degree from VUT. WITS had no record of him completing a master's program. The Technical University of Munich had never heard of him. The German job offer that secured his salary increase was typed up on his own computer. For 5 years, South Africa's state rail agency would rely on the technical expertise of a man who had no technical expertise at all. The hiring process at PRASA never included basic verification. No one called the universities. No one checked with professional engineering bodies. They simply accepted his written claims at face value. In an agency managing billions in infrastructure spending, the most fundamental due diligence was completely absent. Lucky Montana served as PRASA's group CEO during much of Mthimkhulu's tenure. In public statements and internal communications, Montana consistently praised his head of engineering. He described Mthimkhulu as a leading engineer whose expertise was vital to PRASA's modernization efforts. When questions arose about procurement decisions or technical choices, Montana stood firmly behind his man. This support continued even after Mthimkhulu's fraud was exposed. In fact, it intensified. Following the criminal conviction in 2022, Montana, now an MK Party MP, launched a vigorous public defense. He argued that Mthimkhulu had been unfairly targeted, that the media had crucified him. Montana claimed that Mthimkhulu never misled PRASA itself, an extraordinary position given that the entire employment was based on false credentials. Montana's narrative painted Mthimkhulu as a victim of racial persecution. He emphasized that Mthimkhulu had been hired by Metro Rail long before PRASA existed, suggesting this somehow validated his competence. He insisted that practical ability mattered more than paper qualifications. What Montana never addressed was how someone without engineering knowledge could make sound engineering decisions affecting billions in public funds. The relationship between Montana and Mthimkhulu raises uncomfortable questions. Was Montana genuinely deceived, or did he know something was amiss? His sustained defense, even after courts proved the fraud beyond reasonable doubt, suggests a loyalty that transcends normal professional boundaries. Some observers saw Montana's protection as part of broader patronage networks within state-owned enterprises, where political connections mattered more than competence. Mthimkhulu's fraudulent appointment came with immediate financial rewards. His initial salary of 1.6 million rand already placed him among PRASA's top earners. But the fake German job offer changed everything. By presenting this forged document, he triggered a bidding war with an imaginary competitor. PRASA's response was swift and generous, a 75% salary increase to 2.8 million rand annually. Over 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, Mthimkhulu extracted approximately 15 million rand in salary and benefits. Every paycheck represented money that should have gone to someone qualified to make the technical decisions PRASA desperately needed. But the direct theft of his inflated salary was just the beginning of the financial damage. As head of engineering, Mthimkhulu influenced procurement decisions worth billions. He participated in tender evaluations, provided technical assessments, and advised on specifications for new rolling stock. These weren't minor purchases. They were massive infrastructure investments that would affect South African rail transport for decades. The Swifambo rail leasing deal alone was worth 3.5 billion rand. Without actual engineering knowledge, Mthimkhulu's decision-making process remains a mystery. How did he evaluate technical proposals? What criteria did he use to assess engineering specifications? Court records suggest he simply approved whatever came across his desk, rubber-stamping decisions he couldn't possibly understand. In meetings where complex engineering challenges were discussed, he had to fake comprehension while the future of South Africa's rail network hung in the balance. The most catastrophic consequence of Mthimkhulu's fraud emerged in the procurement of new locomotives. PRASA desperately needed to modernize its fleet, and the acquisition of 95 Afro 4000 diesel-electric locomotives from Spain seemed like a solution. Built by Grupo Oasia, these trains were supposed to revolutionize South African rail transport. The contract, worth 600 million rand, was part of the larger Swifambo rail deal that Mthimkhulu helped oversee. But when the locomotives arrived, a stunning design flaw was discovered. They were too tall for South African railway infrastructure. The trains couldn't clear overhead electrical lines. They were incompatible with platform heights. These weren't minor adjustments. The fundamental dimensions of the locomotives didn't match the railways they were meant to run on. How does such a basic error occur? In any competent engineering review, the first step is checking whether new equipment fits existing infrastructure. Height clearances, platform compatibility, and electrical system requirements are elementary considerations. Yet somehow, under Mthimkhulu's technical oversight, PRASA spent 600 million rand on trains that literally could not operate on South African rails. The locomotives sat idle, expensive monuments to incompetence. Some were eventually modified at enormous additional cost. Others never entered service. Meanwhile, commuters continued cramming into deteriorating old trains, experiencing daily breakdowns and delays. The promise of modernization had turned into an expensive joke. Prosecutors later argued that Mthimkhulu's ill-qualified advice directly contributed to this procurement disaster. Without the technical knowledge to evaluate specifications or challenge supplier claims, he had no business approving such purchases. The financial loss exceeded 2 billion rand when considering the full scope of unusable or modified equipment. But the human cost was harder to calculate. Millions of working-class South Africans denied reliable transport while brand-new trains gathered dust. For 5 years, Mthimkhulu's fraud went undetected. He attended meetings, signed documents, and collected his salary while PRASA's technical decisions grew increasingly disastrous. The agency's internal controls, oversight mechanisms, and governance structures all failed to identify the imposter in their ranks. It took external scrutiny to finally expose the truth. In July 2015, the Daily Maverick published an investigation raising questions about Mthimkhulu's credentials. The journalists had done what PRASA never bothered to do. They called the universities. The response was devastating. VUT had no record of Mthimkhulu earning a diploma or BTech degree. Wits confirmed he never completed a master's program there. The Technical University of Munich had never enrolled him in any doctoral program. PRASA's reaction was swift but belated. Within days of the media report, they launched an internal investigation. HR finally contacted the universities directly. The Engineering Council of South Africa was consulted about his professional registration, which didn't exist. Every single qualification on his CV proved fictitious. The speed of Mthimkhulu's downfall after the media exposure highlighted PRASA's negligence. It took journalists just days to uncover what the agency had missed for 5 years. Basic verification calls that should have been made in 2010 were finally happening in 2015, but only because public scrutiny forced PRASA's hand. Mthimkhulu was summarily dismissed. The Hawks arrested him shortly after. PRASA referred the matter for criminal prosecution, while simultaneously pursuing civil action to recover the fraudulent salary payments. The agency that had protected and promoted him for half a decade suddenly treated him like the criminal he was. The legal machinery moved slowly. Although Mthimkhulu was exposed and dismissed in 2015, his criminal trial only began in 2019. The case was handled by the Johannesburg Specialized Commercial Crime Court, where prosecutors from the National Prosecuting Authority methodically built their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented Mthimkhulu's original CV with its fabricated qualifications. They showed the forged German job offer letter that secured his salary increase. University representatives testified that no degrees were ever awarded. The Engineering Council confirmed he was never registered as a professional engineer. Mthimkhulu's defense was weak. He couldn't explain how degrees appeared on his CV that he never earned. He couldn't justify the German job offer that came from a company that never offered him employment. His lawyers attempted to argue manipulation by others, claiming documents were altered without his knowledge. The court rejected these claims entirely. On January 31, 2022, more than 6 years after his arrest, Mthimkhulu was convicted on 3 counts of fraud. The judge found that he knowingly presented fraudulent qualifications to secure appointment and elevation at PRASA. The conviction established legal precedent. This was one of the first major cases prosecuted under South Africa's strengthened anti-fraud laws. The sentencing phase brought even more delays. It wasn't until September 3, 2024, that Mthimkhulu finally learned his fate. The Palm Ridge court handed down the maximum possible sentence, 15 years imprisonment for the principal fraud count, with additional 6-year terms for secondary counts to run concurrently. The severity of the sentence shocked many observers. 15 years for CV fraud was unprecedented in South African legal history. The judge emphasized several aggravating factors: the scale of financial loss to the state, the breach of public trust, and the damage to essential services that millions depended on. Senior state advocate Mthimkhulu Bengu argued that ordinary South Africans had missed out on potential benefits from the funds diverted to Mthimkhulu's fraudulent salary and failed projects. The sentence needed to reflect not just the monetary theft but the broader harm to society. When critical infrastructure fails because of incompetent leadership, the poorest citizens suffer most. Beyond the criminal sentence, the High Court issued a confiscation order under the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. Mthimkhulu's assets were attached, and he was ordered to repay approximately 5.8 million rand to PRASA. This amount matched an earlier civil judgment from 2020, when PRASA successfully sued to recover the salary paid under false pretenses. The National Prosecuting Authority hailed the sentence as a victory against white-collar crime. Hawk's spokesperson Katlego Mogale emphasized that the case sent a clear message: corruption in state entities would face serious consequences. The South African Association of PhDs publicly welcomed the verdict, noting that falsifying qualifications undermines the entire education system's integrity. Yet even with Mthimkhulu behind bars, troubling questions remained. How many other ghosts haunted South Africa's state agencies? If one man could fake his way to a top engineering position for 5 years, what did that say about governance across government entities? Civil society organizations like Open Secrets called for broader accountability. They argued that Mthimkhulu was just one node in a larger corruption network at PRASA. The executives who enabled him, the officials who signed off on disastrous procurements, the board members who failed in oversight, none faced similar consequences. Lucky Montana's continued defense of Mthimkhulu added another layer of complexity. Even after the conviction, Montana maintained that Mthimkhulu was competent despite lacking degrees. He accused media of conducting a witch hunt, of using Mthimkhulu to attack him personally. Montana claimed the real issue wasn't the fake qualifications but rather political persecution. This narrative found some support among those who saw Mthimkhulu as a scapegoat for PRASA's broader failures. Yes, he lied about his credentials, but did that single lie really cause billions in losses? The Afro 4000 locomotive disaster involved multiple decision-makers, numerous technical reviews, and various approval levels. How did they all fail? The debate reflects deeper tensions about accountability in South Africa's state-owned enterprises. When corruption becomes systemic, identifying individual culpability becomes complex. Mthimkhulu's prosecution was straightforward. He provably lied. But what about those who should have verified his credentials? Those who approved the locomotive purchases? Those who continued defending him even after his fraud was exposed? Meanwhile, PRASA's dysfunction continued. New scandals emerged. Service delivery remained abysmal. The railway system that Mthimkhulu supposedly destroyed was already broken when he arrived and stayed broken after he left. His fraud was a symptom of institutional rot, not its sole cause. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about South Africa's skills crisis. The fact that PRASA so desperately needed engineering expertise that they never verified credentials speaks to broader challenges. When qualified professionals are scarce and political pressure for transformation is intense, shortcuts become tempting. Some observers noted the irony that Mthimkhulu's fake doctorate from Germany carried more weight than actual South African qualifications might have. The colonial mindset that automatically respects European credentials created vulnerability to exactly this kind of fraud. As South Africa grapples with state capture's aftermath, the Mthimkhulu case offers important lessons. It shows how individual dishonesty can scale into national disaster when institutions fail their basic functions. It demonstrates that even the most obvious lies can persist when nobody bothers to check. But perhaps most importantly, it reveals the human cost of corruption in essential services. While Mthimkhulu enjoyed his fraudulent millions, while executives protected their networks, while politicians played their games, ordinary South Africans waited on platforms for trains that never came. They lost jobs because of transport failures. Students missed examinations. Workers spent hours in transit that should have taken minutes. The 15-year sentence represents justice for Mthimkhulu's crimes. But for the millions who depend on functional rail transport, justice would be a system that actually works. As long as procurement remains corrupted, as long as competence takes second place to connections, as long as oversight exists only on paper, the conditions that created Daniel Mthimkhulu remain. The fake engineer is in prison. The broken railway system he left behind serves as his real monument, a daily reminder of what happens when institutions meant to serve the public instead serve themselves.